Of all the financial titans and philanthropists of the 20th century, none are more complex or mysterious than George Soros. Like Carnegie, J.P. Morgan, and the Rockefellers, he amassed billions through ruthless business decisions, only to turn around and give away most of his fortune to advance his own personal philosophy. He can move world financial markets simply by voicing an opinion, or destabilize a government by buying and selling its currency. He also pledged more aid last year to help people in Russia than the U.S. government did.
Few people have been called kingmaker, philanthropist, world changer, and possible war criminal, all wrapped in the same person. One man has worn all of these crowns and has been proclaimed as one of the greatest humanitarians in history, adored by the progressive left worldwide. He has also been called a villain, criminal, and robber baron, responsible for the destruction of economies and societies, making billions at the expense of the very people he claims to assist. But he also has been called a betrayer of his fellow Jews. Let's take a closer look at George Soros. Who is George Soros? Why is his background so questionable? Why have the left-wing media tried to hide the facts of his life? How did he become so wealthy just after World War II? Why do some consider him a great supporter of American terrorist organizations and someone trying to destroy the Federal Republic? Hello, I'm Colin Heaton, former history professor, Army and Marine Corps veteran, and welcome to this episode of Forgotten History. George Soros was born George Soros on April 12, 1930, to father Tivadar and mother Elizabeth Soros. Soros himself was a successful Jewish attorney in Budapest with great political connections. Being Jewish with those connections, Tivadar saw what was coming, so he bought forged documents for his family, changing their name and religion, and bribed a friend, who was a local government official, to claim that 14-year-old George was, in fact, his Christian godson. What follows is a serious indictment on the Soros family, and even George Soros himself. When I was staying with a friend in Austria in 1999 doing his interview, we went to the local meat market, where we were talking. This was where an older lady, who said her name was Elizabeth Roxney, spelling in question, with a very thick accent, who asked me in broken English if I was an American. I said yes. She asked me if I knew a man in America named George Soros. I told her no, because at that time I had never heard of George Soros. Then she told me a chilling story. According to her, Soros was originally George Soros, and the family, despite being Jewish, had turned on their fellow Jews in a village just outside of Budapest, working with the Arrow Cross Party, which they called the Government of National Unity. These were Hungarian fascist and Nazi collaborators. Roxney said that there were many families who all knew the Soroses under their actual name, and that the family ran the local black market with local political support. She said that, starting in early 1944, George Soros, along with his father, uncle, and a family friend, began extorting their neighbors for protection. Tivadar Soros bribed local officials he knew in government and had new identity papers created, giving the family their new name of Soros, altering their background, declaring they were Catholic, thereby inoculating them from the roundup of Jews that was coming, which Tivadar Soros knew was coming from his friends in the Budapest government. Elizabeth Roxney said that the Soros or Soros family would offer to hide and protect their Jewish friends as the Germans increased their presence and the SS began their roundups just after Easter, including providing new identity papers. This was where Elizabeth's story became even more interesting. According to her, the Soros family, under their new identities, assisted the Arrow Cross Party and took all the money, jewelry, furs, anything of value over several months as protection to hide them from the Germans, and later they took the titles to their property. Hungary's regent, Admiral Miklos Horthy di Nagybányai, had joined the Axis along with Romania and Bulgaria earlier, and he and Hitler had a very cordial relationship at first. Hungarian soldiers even supported German operations on the Eastern Front at a very high price. But Hitler began insisting upon Horthy handing over his Jews, saying they must either be exterminated or put in concentration camps, something Horthy resisted for almost 4 years. April 1944 was when Hitler sent Adolf Eichmann into Budapest to deport Hungary's estimated 800,000 Jews, with 200,000 being in Budapest alone, and most would go to Auschwitz-Birkenau. Hitler then sent SS Major Otto Skorzeny to kidnap Miklos Horthy Jr., forcing his father into compliance. Admiral Horthy resigned and was replaced by the rabid anti-Semite Ferenc Szalasi, the leader of the Arrow Cross Party. But, according to Haraxny herself, when the bribes ran out, the Soros brothers, along with the fake godfather of young George, forced them to sign over their property deeds, essentially stealing their homes and farms.
When the Nazis occupied Budapest in 1944, George Soros' father was a successful lawyer. He lived on an island in the Danube and liked to commute to work in a rowboat. But knowing there were problems ahead for the Jews, he decided to split his family up. He bought them forged papers, and he bribed a government official to take 14-year-old George Soros in and swear that he was his Christian godson. But survival carried a heavy price tag. While hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews were being shipped off to the death camps, George Soros accompanied his phony godfather on his appointed rounds, confiscating property from the Jews.
Eventually, all of the Jews in their village, which she said numbered over 300, were betrayed by the Soros family and handed over for deportation, as Eichmann then deported 437,402 Jews to Auschwitz-Birkenau in only 60 days.
These are pictures from 1944 of what happened to George Soros' friends and neighbors.
She saw her entire family, parents, older brother, and sister, taken one morning as they were located hiding under the floor of a barn on their property. The reason she was not taken was because her father had sent her out at age 10 before dawn to gather eggs, which they would eat raw. As she stated, "When I came back, my family and all of the others under their protection were being loaded on a truck with many other Jewish friends who they all knew, and I knew. All had been betrayed by the Soros family. I never saw any of them again. I was the only survivor." She saw George there that morning pointing to where people were hiding with a man she did not know. This was presumably his father's friend, the supposed godfather, who was a member of the Arrow Cross Party.
My understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right.
Despite his later claims that he was only an observer, Soros was, according to the witness, a willing and active participant by betraying the people he grew up with for profit. Or was he just a child following the orders of his older relatives and a friend? At this point, it does not matter, because he cannot be prosecuted under international law for those crimes due to the fact that he was under the age of 15 at that time. That was determined the age of culpability as governed by the Geneva Convention of 1929.
Well, actually, funny way, it's just like in markets, that if I weren't there, of course I wasn't doing it, but somebody else would be taking it away anyhow. In other words, whether I was there or not, I was only a spectator, the property was being taken away.
It has been presumed that with the confiscation of Jewish property in 1944 to 1945 and then selling those properties to non-Jewish Hungarians, the family made a nice profit. In addition, the cash, jewels, and other assets extorted from their friends and neighbors were probably traded or sold on the black market, and this would explain the family's expanding wealth. This wealth would have been needed to bribe the post-war communist officials, if that is in fact what happened, because leaving Hungary under Soviet occupation was not an easy thing to do, and bribery was commonplace. Ironically, in a 60 Minutes interview, In 1998, Soros virtually admitted what his family had done. Soros had tried for years to have this episode removed from the CBS archives and scrubbed from the internet.
Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all.
What is of interest is that when Soros and his family left Hungary and arrived in England in 1947, he was a very rich young man, when every other Jew in Hungary had lost everything, in most cases even their lives. George Soros studied philosophy under Karl Popper at the London School of Economics, but decided against becoming a philosopher and joined the London bank Singer and Friedlander. In 1956, he and the family moved to New York City, where he worked initially as an analyst of European securities and became an expert in currency exchanges and European markets. There, he worked as an arbitrage trader with F.M. Meyer from 1956 to 1959 and as an analyst with Wertheim and Company from 1959 to 1963. From 1963 to 1973, he worked at Arnold and S. Bleichroeder, becoming the vice president, and he persuaded the company to set up an offshore investment fund in 1967, called First Eagle, for him to run. Then, in 1969, the company founded a second fund for Soros, the Double Eagle Hedge Fund. When investment regulations restricted his ability to run the funds as he wished, he quit his position there in 1973 and established a private investment company that became Quantum Fund. George Soros had the seed money from his family, and this was always in question. With profits from this fund, he started the Soros Fund Management in 1973. Eventually, Double Eagle was renamed the Quantum Fund officially, and it became the primary hedge fund that Soros advised. His knowledge of regional and global economic trends, combined with his deep pockets and tolerance for risk, has allowed him to amass a fortune now valued in the billions. In 1984, Soros began investments in the Warsaw Pact nations under communism, especially his native Hungary, starting scholarships, and he managed to operate in the country without any communist government interference, which means he spread a lot of money around. He expanded his operations into Czechoslovakia, Poland, Russia, and Yugoslavia just as communism was collapsing, but many of the old regime were still in power. Even the communists had their price. Soros has a history of destabilizing economies and then swooping in to pick up the pieces as a ruthless robber baron like no other in history.
Soros makes huge bets on whole countries and economies. Last year, when he saw cracks in the Asia boom, he began selling the currency in Thailand. Traders in Hong Kong followed suit, triggering a financial crisis that plunged much of Asia into a depression.
Soros has been on a rampage for decades, trying to undermine international markets, destabilize economies in order to establish a new world order dominated by himself and other like-minded socialist financial elites.
In the last 2 years, you've been blamed for financial collapse of Thailand, Malaysia, Indonesia, Japan, and Russia.
Yeah, all of the above.
All of the above.
Yeah.
Are you that powerful?
No, I think there's a great misunderstanding.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia said that the region spent 40 years trying to build up its economy, and along comes a moron like Soros with a lot of money, and it's all over. He called you a criminal.
He poured $2 billion into Russia in the 1990s to essentially become the major shareholder in that nation's economy and asked the U.S. Federal Reserve for a $7 billion loan to help. But why? Well, when the Fed refused, he suggested that the ruble be devalued as much as 25%, which would make his investment even stronger to gain control, which fueled the crash. Soros also threw his money around the world, including Haiti, Bosnia, and nations in Africa during the 1990s. He poured $100 million into Russia again to help their scientists maintain control of intellectual property with his IOU attached, and paid to train the Ukrainian military after the fall of the USSR when Ukraine became independent. In September 1992, the British government devalued the pound sterling as Soros had just sold billions of pounds during the days before the devaluation, much of it purchased with borrowed money. He had just sold the Italian lira short, and it proceeded to devalue, and he later came back in and bought them back for a profit. After the crash in Italy and Britain, Soros also bought back British pounds at a massive discount, repaid the money he had borrowed in the first place, and made a profit of about $1 billion in just one day, and earned the nickname the man who broke the Bank of England. When the dust settled on both actions, he made a total of $2 billion profit. In December 2002, a French court convicted Soros of insider trading for a 1988 stock deal involving financial services company Société Générale, and he was fined 2.2 million euros, or $2.9 million. Soros appealed the ruling, but it was upheld by the Cour de Cassation, which is France's Supreme Court, in 2006. Facing new federal regulations concerning hedge funds, Soros announced in July 2011 that the Quantum Endowment Fund would no longer manage the money of outside investors. Instead, it would only handle the assets of Soros and his family in offshore accounts. In 2003, Soros created startup funding for the liberal think tank, the Center for American Progress, pledging millions of dollars to groups such as MoveOn.org to oppose the re-election of Republican President George W. Bush in 2004. He later financially supported the Democratic Senator Barack Obama's presidential campaigns in 2008 and 2012, and he donated to Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election and to Joe Biden in 2020. In 2010, Soros had given $100 million to the non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch. Despite left-wing media organizations trying to provide cover for Soros by denying that he funded domestic terror groups, George Soros' philanthropic group, the Open Society Foundations, admittedly invested $220 million in various racial, social justice organizations and leaders. This includes primarily the domestic terror groups Black Lives Matter and Antifa. They even announced it months in advance of the riots that cost about $2 billion in damages and cost several lives. Soros has personally donated more than $32 billion to so-called left-wing charitable causes through his grant-making network, the Open Society Foundations. His political support deeply extended into U.S. state and local politics. He spent billions helping progressive radical Democrats running for various offices, from governors to district attorneys and attorneys general. He assisted in the campaigns to elect the criminal DAs Fani Willis in Fulton County, Georgia, Alvin Bragg in New York City, and many liberal judges nationwide. He also poured money into California races to prop up progressive liberals, and also sent millions to the Democratic challenger to Republican Senator Ted Cruz in Texas. All of these persons have been brought out into the light for their illegal, selective, unethical, and radical applications of state and federal laws, thereby exposing the deep state, and see our video on that subject. Regarding the betrayal of not just his fellow Jews, but his family's friends and neighbors, George Soros has no feelings of guilt for his actions.
I don't feel guilty because I'm engaged in an amoral activity which is not meant to have anything to do with guilt.
Soros demands that all other businesses, investment groups, and hedge funds adhere to the rules and regulations which he himself avoids.
Part of the reason he is so rich is that the Soros hedge funds operate offshore in the Netherlands Antilles to avoid scrutiny by the Securities and Exchange Commission. So even while Soros tells Congress and the Treasury that hedge funds must be regulated to stop the global crisis, he's avoiding the rules.
So how does George Soros make his wealth and escape regulations and scrutiny without abiding by the very rules that apply to all other Americans, rules he supports, as he is a citizen? How does he do it? He avoids scrutiny by the IRS and Security Exchange Commission, as well as other international agencies, due to his methods of operating outside of U.S. jurisdiction.
Because the fund is not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission. We are not
Licensed to do business in the United States.
That's right.
Because?
Because we are not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission.
George Soros, the investment genius, is also, by some definitions, a criminal mastermind determined to destroy the free market system in the USA and around the world, and establish a global digital currency that is managed by the Marxist global elites. Today, George Soros has an estimated wealth of $7.2 billion, but that number may be much larger given his offshore accounts that cannot easily be monitored. Whether or not you support, oppose, believe, or disbelieve the stories of George Soros, just remember what he said in his own words. Thank you for watching this episode of Forgotten History. If you liked what you saw, please click like, share, and subscribe. And if you would like to assist with the ever-increasing cost of production, please consider becoming a channel member and joining our Patreon page. Please check out our merchandise store. And thanks for watching.